This is Mark Leslie. Welcome to Free Friday Frights. This is the Free Friday Frights for Friday, November 2nd, 2018. This week, it is a story, a very short story called The Shadow Men. And this is a story that is actually meant to be read around a campfire. So get yourself into that position, huddle around the campfire with me, and I'm going to share the story. The Shadow Men by Mark Leslie. I'll never forget the night that changed my life forever. It happened in the woods when I was 10 years old. It was dark, the air was crisp and chilly. Curious little sounds cut through the night, small animals rustling in the nearby bushes, the haunting call of a loon on the lake, leaves whispering in the breeze. And the air was charged with the smell of the still burning embers of a recently doused campfire. It was a night, in fact, not all that different than tonight. I was sleeping in a four-man tent with my parents and younger brother, and I woke up with an overwhelming urge to pee. I crawled out of my sleeping bag, careful not to wake anyone else, slipped outside the tent, and headed down the moonlit path to where I remembered the outhouse was. Before I took more than a dozen steps, I heard a noise behind me, the crack of a branch breaking underfoot. With my hair standing on edge, I managed not to let out a yelp as I turned. There on the path, not 3 steps behind me, stood my little brother, a look on his cute button-nosed face like I just caught him sneaking a treat from the cookie jar. "Jimmy," I whispered, "what are you doing?" He stood with his right leg partially crossed over his left. "Need to pee," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Geez, Jimmy, if you had to go that bad, why'd you wait so long?" "Because," he said, his 6-year-old eyes wide and bright in the reflected moonlight, "the shadow men might get me." I felt a shiver running down my spine, despite the fact that I knew the shadow men were something my father had conjured up that evening around the campfire. They were the bogeymen of the wilderness that hid behind trees and lurked in the shadows. Their sole purpose was to trick little boys down the wrong path in the woods, deeper and deeper into the forest, and far from the safety of their parents. Even at 10, I knew my father told the story just for fun and perhaps partially to keep us from wandering far away from them from the campsite. But when Jimmy said that, I still felt a chill. "The shadow men aren't real, Jimmy." "Are too. Listen." At just that moment, the haunting call of a loon echoed through the forest. Delivering a deep shiver up the base of my spine. "That's just a loon," I said, but the chill wouldn't go away. "No, listen, Charlie. It's a little boy, one that the shadow man tricked. He's warning us." Frustrated with my brother and okay, a little frightened, I just wanted it all to end. I didn't want to hear anymore, so I thought I'd throw a good scare into him. I turned and I ran down the path. "Jimmy," I called out, "behind you! The shadow men are behind you!" He let out a cry. "Wait!" Able to see the path clearly in the moonlight, I ran fast. I took a sharp turn and I ducked down behind a low bush. Jimmy ran straight past me, still calling ahead on the trail for me to stop, panic rising in his voice as he seemed to think I'd gotten really far ahead of him. I had to put my hands over my mouth to suppress a laugh, but I stayed silent that way, listening to the padding of his footfalls on the packed dirt path, and his calls for me to wait, receding into the darkness. His last cry was drowned out by the shrill call of a loon in the distance, and I never saw him again. But I hear him all the time. Now, whenever I'm out in the wilderness, when I'm out camping, I can hear my little brother's voice. Somewhere, masked within the sad, mournful, unearthly, half-laughing, half-wailing cry of a loon, I can hear my little brother warning me that the shadow men are near. Just listen for it and tell me what you hear. Well, that was the Shadow Men story by Mark Leslie. The story was originally written to be and published in the anthology Northern Haunts, 100 Terrifying New England Tales. It was edited by Tim Deal and was published by Shroud Publishing. This is the hardcover version. There was a paperback version of that put out as well. I since reprinted the story in a digital collection called Bumps in the Night, which was 4 short stories meant to be read around a campfire. And that collection, which is going to be in print very, very soon. This is November 2018 when I'm recording this. It should be in print and available within the next few weeks. That digital collection was actually dedicated to my friend J.P. Couvrette. Now, J.P. Couvrette was actually the genesis of the story, the Shadow Men. And J.P. was a friend of mine. I worked with him. We went to high school together, played hockey together, and I worked with him at Fox Lake Lodge in mid-northern Ontario, which is just about an hour and a half, 2 hours north of Sudbury, Ontario. And we worked at the Fox Lake Lodge together. And we would, talk late into the night, and oftentimes we would share ghost stories. And we shared a bunk in the same room, bunk beds. I was on the top bunk, he was on the bottom. And, we'd lay there in the dark telling each other scary stories. And JP told me this eerie tale of the legend of Crooked Neck. And it was a guy who had been wronged, and he was hung in a tree in the middle of the forest. And when you hear the call of the loon, it's the sound of old Crooked Neck coming to get you. And that he's getting closer, or it's the warning that Crooked Neck is coming to get you. And that story, well, after JP told it to me, of course, I lay awake all night. I couldn't sleep. I didn't have nightmares because I couldn't fall asleep. I was just terrified. But the story stuck with me all those years. And so I kind of used the legend of the Shadow People, or the Shadow Men. I used them in a different short story, Erratic Cycles, which had been published, a decade earlier. And it was about a guy whose fear was being trapped in the woods because of a story his father told him around a campfire when he was young. And he's stranded on his car in northern Ontario on Highway 144. And he's afraid that the Shadow People are going to get him, or the Shadow Men are going to get him. And so I wanted to explore the Shadow Men in a little bit more detail. And for this particular anthology, the first anthology, Northern Haunts, I wanted to write it so that somebody could read the story at a campfire, like just directly either read from the book or memorize the story because it's short enough, or at least get the gist of it, and just reshare that tale as a fun and eerie way to scare people. And that was an ode to JP. So when I put together the collection Bumps in the Night, very specifically the stories that were meant to be read around campfires, including this tale, I dedicated it to JP. And that was shortly after, unfortunately, I found out that he had died. JP had grown up to become a teacher. He was a beloved teacher, and that I could see just because of his personality. I could see the kids absolutely loving him. JP was not only a fantastic storyteller, he was extremely passionate about the wilderness. He was one of the most avid and passionate fishermen I ever knew. And he could tell an amazing story, and the man was funny. Yes, he was also scary because he was good at storytelling, but boy, was he ever funny. He was one of the funniest people I ever knew. So I was really sad to hear from his sister that he had passed away, because it had been years since I'd seen JP. But even though it had been years since I had seen him, he still lives here, and he lives in my imagination because of the great things that he shared with me, the great stories, the great tales, and the wonderful laughs that we had over the years. So it was an honor for me to be able to dedicate that collection to JP, and it's an honor for me to share that, because that haunting call of the loon is something that people from where I grew up, it's something that we know and love and adore, and it's such a beautiful sound, but isn't it also a wonderfully haunting sound? Well, in any case, that was the Shadow Men, story by Mark Leslie for Free Friday Frights. Thanks for joining me for this Free Friday Frights. Hope you have a fantastically frightening Friday and a wonderful weekend.